What is up, everybody? Welcome to the MMA Engine and welcome to Propability. We're going to be breaking down these props from a data-driven perspective. As always, I am here with Uncle Weezy. Weezy, what is up? You looking forward to UFC 276?
How could you not be? This is such a great card, man, from top to bottom. I've got a few bets going here, man. This is a fantastic fight card. Two title fights. I am so excited for the Strickland fight. I am so excited to see Jalin the Tarantula Turner, Hall versus Muniz. Even these ladies' fights are very compelling. I can't wait to break it down with you guys. This is such a good card.
Yep, I cannot wait for it. I have a couple spots already, a couple spots that I am potentially eyeing. And yeah, 12 fights that we get to break down. Should be a fun time. Before we get started, you guys can all please leave a like, subscribe here to the MMA Engine. Let's keep growing the channel. You guys have been killing it with the support. And I say we shout out the chat real quick, as always, before we get started. Those boys, Cowboys saying, no man that beats off to cartoons is ever going to beat me. Yes, Sean Strickland killed it at the press conference. That guy, I don't know what to say about Sean Strickland, but I cannot wait for that fight. We got Daz in the chat. We got Gerald in the chat. Brandon, Grateful Dude. We have Prem Tro in the chat. We got Ben stuff. We got Mark Schillingberg, Chronic Conversations. There we go. Smooth Cat. We got Headley One, Raw Torque. We got Matthew in the chat. Adam, Quaver, Phillip, JP. We got a dono from Chalk Dog UFC. Thank you, Chalk Dog UFC. $20 dono. Super Oi. Let us stack units like flapjacks. Let's do it. Weezy, we're going to bring in some flapjacks here. And as always, guys, we're going to start with the first fight of the night. And we have Jessica Rose Clark going against Julija Stoliarenko. We have the fight doesn't go at plus 170. The over-under is going to be set at 2.5 rounds. The over 2.5 is minus 240. Under 2.5 rounds is plus 190. That fight goes to decision is minus 210. And that fight doesn't go to decision, plus 170 on BetOnline, which is the best price out there. Weezy, what is sticking out to you on this very first fight of the night?
Yeah, so when we look at the UFC finish rates here under the fight doesn't go to decision column, we're going to see some very interesting numbers for the fight goes to decision, because we've got one of their 4 combined wins have been finishes inside the distance and only 1 of 7 losses. So only 2 of Stoliarenko and Clark's 11 combined UFC fights have finished inside the distance. So when we go down here to the fight goes to decision, under the UFC decision rates, we see that 9 of 11 number here, which gives us an 81% decision rate. That is a 16.7% advantage over the divisional decision rate, which is sitting probably right around 70%. Or no, I'm sorry, 65%. And then the implied probability of the line, we're getting a 15.2% break over the implied probability of the line. But then the elephant in the room, Brady, is what if Jessica Rose Clark goes into Julija Stoliarenko's guard and gets locked up in an armbar? And we saw, Alexis Davis get locked into a deep armbar by Julija Stoliarenko. And it reminded me of all the bets where I had Alexis Davis and I said, please try a fucking takedown because you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and she would never go for a takedown and I lose my bets. And then what does she do? 2 minutes into the Stoliarenko fight, she gets a takedown and I have to smash my TV with a hammer because of that. Well, that's exactly what Jessica Rose Clark did in her last fight against Stephanie Egger. She went against a judo player, fed her hips, got into the clinch with the judo player. It's a huge mistake. She got thrown and she got armbarred in the first round. And then in an interview told everybody, Brady, that was not the plan. She basically said, I did exactly what my coaches begged me not to do for 6 consecutive weeks in training camp. Can you believe that? And I was sitting there watching that fight saying, what is she doing? Why is she clinching with the judo player? Why isn't she just striking? So it seems like Jessica Rose Clark can't help herself. She is a good wrestler, and she's probably going to try to take this fight to the ground at some point. And then will she be able to get that armbar defense to avoid what Julija Stoliarenko does best? Just if we're looking at the data, though, Brady, I mean, look at all this green here. That's a lot of green. 5 of 7 of Clark's fights have went to decision. 4 of 4 of Stoliarenko's UFC fights have went to decision. So 82%, 16.7% edge over the divisional decision rate, 15.2% edge over the implied probability of the line. And then you're just going to be holding your breath that Jessica Rose Clark doesn't do something stupid. But, we're only overpaying by 1.57% for the fight goes to decision. And with those kind of numbers and with the 35, or I should say 65.1% decision rate that we have in this division, I can give you that bet and feel pretty good about it as a parlay piece.
Yeah, I won't be betting on this fight. I kind of retired from betting on fights like these. But yeah, you mentioned, I think this fight more often than not does go to decision. If it does finish, it probably is Stoliarenko getting that armbar. Stoliarenko by submission is plus 500. And then also Stoliarenko, the finish only, they're kind of all over it. Look, yeah, it looks, they opened that up minus 150 and it's now minus 185. So people are all over the finish only. And then we were also looking for that Clark decision only. But I saw DraftKings open that up at like minus 250. So I think they're all over this one, Weezy. I'm going to sit back and watch this one. I think it does go the distance, unless, of course, Jessica Rose Clark does make a mistake, which we'll see what happens there. But the next fight, we have Maycee Barber going against Jessica I. And we have the over-under is set at 2.5 rounds. We have the over 2.5 rounds juiced to minus 300, under 2.5 plus 240. The fight goes to decision minus 250. And the fight doesn't go to decision is plus 195. Weezy, what's sticking out here on this one?
So 6 of their 23 combined fights have finished inside the distance at the UFC level. So we've got a really good sample size here. 15 fights for Jessica I, 8 fights for Maycee Barber. And look at Jessica I, dude. 2 finishes in 15 fights. She's had 9 losses, only been finished once, and it was by Valentina Shevchenko. And she's got 5 wins. She's only finished one of them. I don't even know who she finished. It must have been a long time ago because I don't even know. But Barber does have 4 out of 6 finishes in her UFC wins, and she's never been finished in either of her losses. So what we see here at the UFC level is 2 fighters who in 11 combined UFC losses have only been finished once. And the person to finish the fight was, the best flyweight on the planet in Valentina Shevchenko. So this one is one where the data is telling us we've got to go fight goes to decision. And we'll look at it down here. That big green area right there that I'm circling, that's the 10 out of 11 combined losses that have went to decision. And still, only 6 of their 11 combined wins at the UFC level have went to decision. That's still 54%. That's pretty good. But we see that 73%, actually 74% of their combined fights at the UFC level have went to decision. That is a 14.8% edge over the divisional decision rate, which is sitting around 59-60%. And then it's a 2.5% edge over the implied probability of the line, which is sitting just north of 71% here at 71.43%. So yes, we are overpaying by 12.34% based on this number, 40.91%, or I'm sorry, 59.09%, the decision rate, minus 71.43%. So we're overpaying there. But when we go down here and we just look at the data for these 2 fighters, we can see that we're underpaying by 2.5% when we compare their decision rates here at the UFC level to the implied probability of the line. And we're getting almost a 15% break in terms of how many of their fights go to decision compared to how many flyweight fights go to decision in the UFC that are 3-round fights. So I like this over, and I like this fight goes to decision here. I think it's a fantastic parlay piece. And not only that, I don't think we have to necessarily worry so much about Jessica I knocking out Maycee Barber or it going the other way around. Look, I mean, I's been in 14 UFC fights and she's only been finished once. And frankly, she's fought better competition than Maycee Barber. So I do like this one going the full distance. Love the fact that in 11 combined UFC losses, these ladies have been combined a total time of once.
Yep, and that one finish loss was against Valentina Shevchenko, so I think we got to give her some slack there. So, yeah, I like it as well. Minus 250 looks like the best price out there. I see that Headley one saying anyone on I by decision. I by decision is currently plus 400 on DraftKings, and I don't hate the shot on really either fighter by decision. Let's see, Maycee Barber by decision is like minus 115, but yeah, I by decision plus 400. It probably goes to decision. It's probably competitive, and who knows what the hell the judges are going to think. So I don't hate a shot on that at plus 400. I think that's kind of nuts.
I think it's really good because Jessica Eye is in a ton of close fights. And, I just think like if you're holding a Maycee Barber ticket at minus what, 220, Brady?
Minus 282.
Okay. Yeah. Would you want to be holding that ticket if this fight takes place like most Jessica Eye fights do, where it's just very close, where there's a lot of strikes thrown, where nobody goes down, and neither one of these ladies grapples offensively that much? It might just be a volume striking battle. And then if you want to lay your minus 280 ticket in the hands of Sal D'Amato and Chris Lee, you be my guest. But I think this fight is going to decision, and I'd rather pay that minus 250 for fight goes and minus 280 because the judges can't steal the fight goes ticket from you.
Yeah, the judges absolutely cannot steal that. I think that minus 250 is a very good parlay piece that I've been eyeing up all week. Let us move on to, I believe this is the most juiced fight doesn't go to decision line on the entire card. We have Andre Muniz going against Uriah Hall. The over-under is set at 1.5. We have the over 1.5 at plus 110, the under 1.5 at minus 140. The fight goes to decision at plus 300, and the fight doesn't go to decision minus 400 on BetOnline. That is the best price out there. And of course, FanDuel is going to chalk that up to minus 650. So, yeah, Weezy, what do you got for this one here?
Yeah, I mean, this is crazy. But yeah, you can see right here under the betting lines, Brady, what I do is I compare the divisional finish rate to the implied probability of the line, right? So minus 400 has an 80% implied probability. The 185-pound 3-round fight since 2013, they're finishing around 55.5% of the time. So we take that number and we subtract that number, 80%, and we see that if you compare those two benchmarks to each other, when you bet fight doesn't go to decision for Hall versus Muniz, you're overpaying by 24.54%. And then if we can even look down here and look at the combined amount of fights at the UFC level that Hall and Muniz have had together that have finished inside the distance in their wins and losses. And we see that we're paying 80% for the fight doesn't go to decision, but these guys' fights are only finishing 5 out of 8 times. 15 out of 24 is the actual fraction, but that's 62.5%. That's 5/8. So that's 7% better than this number, 55.46%, but it's 17.5% worse than what we're actually paying for this line at 80%. So it's not exactly something I'm running to the window to bet here. And the fight goes at plus 350. I mean, that's a 22.22% implied probability, but we know that 44.54% of middleweight fights go the distance. So we're underpaying for that one by 22.32%, and we're actually underpaying by the over 2.5 at plus 275 by about 23.44%. And if you want to move down to that over 1.5, Brady, you're getting a 17.57% break over the amount of fights that go over 1.5, which is 63%. So, 63 minus 45, we're getting that 17.5% break there. So if you want to be a contrarian and go the over, maybe go that over 1.5. It's plus money. You're getting a really nice break based on the benchmark of this fight. And, only 62.5% of these fights have finished inside the distance when you combine Hall and Muniz at the UFC level. So it just seems like I get it why you're betting the fight doesn't go here if you're on that line. You're just overpaying for it at minus 400.
Yeah, kind of like last week. Not a lot of people. Some people actually did think the Curtis Vera fight would go the distance. I didn't. I thought the fight would finish, but I wasn't going out there and laying like minus 800 on the fight doesn't go. Another situation here where, I think it should finish. You have Andre Muniz submission upside early on. You have Uriah Hall knockout upside. But I just don't really see myself laying the minus 400. I don't even like that as a parlay piece, really. I could very well see this going over, and it looks like that over 1.5 has been hit. It was at plus 125, and it's been nothing but love for that over 1.5. Now currently at plus 110. I still see a plus 120 out there. Bet Online did open up the under 2.5 at like minus 140, minus 150. And I was actually napping during the time, and I woke up and it was like minus 175. And then a couple of minutes later, they actually just pulled it off and moved that 2.5 to 1.5. So if you're one of the lucky ones that got that under 2.5 at like minus 150, congrats to you. But I just can't lay minus 400 on this fight. Doesn't go. So I'm going to sit back and watch this one. I think it does finish, but I'm not laying minus 400 to find out. Let us move on to the next one. And this is one that I believe we both have a bet on. We have Brad Tavares going against Dricus du Plessis. We have the over-under set at 2.5 rounds, the over 2.5 minus 115, the under 2.5 minus 115. Fight goes to decision plus 105. Fight doesn't go to decision is minus 135. The best line out there on that fight doesn't go is on FanDuel Sportsbook at minus 124. And I did pull the trigger on the fight doesn't go at plus 105 on Bet Online earlier in the week. It was a must bet for me. And you have a guy in Dricus du Plessis who has 18 professional fights. He has never seen the scorecards, win or loss, and you're getting it at plus money. That's kind of a no-brainer for me. Where the line's kind of out now, I think if you like the fight doesn't go at this point, you probably just bet Dricus inside the distance. I think the finish equity is mostly on his part, but at plus money, I had to take the shot there, Weezy. What are the analytics saying about the fight doesn't go to decision line currently here?
Okay, so you mentioned it. 18 of 18 fights for du Plessis, this number that I have highlighted here. So we've got the killer be killed fighter. And we always talk about that. When you've got that killer be killed fighter, you want to bet that fight doesn't go to decision prop because the history tells us that just the way that this individual fights, win or lose, means that it's going to finish inside the distance. It's a style thing. So when we look at the numbers over here, though, we're seeing that these red numbers here indicate that if you're betting the fight doesn't go to decision based off of the histories of these two fighters at the UFC level, that you're horrifically overpaying for it because of Brad Tavares. See, Brad Tavares at the UFC level has 14 wins. He's only finished 2 of them. But he's been finished in 3 of his 6 losses. And so 5 of his 20 total fights have went to decision. But it's 2 of 2 for du Plessis. So even though we've got this number here that says combined, they're only finishing about 32% of the time, we have a fighter in here who's finishing 100% of the time. And we've seen it before where the best example that I can think of right now, Brady, where this particular strategy did not work out, is Misha Cirkunov versus Krzysztof Jotko. You remember that fight? I remember I had a fight doesn't go to decision, and you got a guy like Cirkunov, who at the time going into that Jotko fight, I believe all of his fights had finished inside the distance at the UFC level. And then you had a guy in Jotko who was a decisionator. And you said, well, usually the killer be killed fighter, the style of that killer be killed fighter pushes the urgency of the decisionator, and it winds up, finishing inside the distance. That case, it didn't. But we've got another situation like that here where we've got one killer be killed fighter and then one fighter that's not just the opposite of that. 5 of 20 fights, only 25% of a huge sample size of fights are finishing inside the distance. So which one of these guys is going to get their way? Well, usually when we have a killer be killed fighter like du Plessis involved in the fight, you're going to see that line for the fight doesn't go to decision. You're going to be overpaying for it. Like if we just look here at Munhoz, right? Fight doesn't go. We're overpaying by 24%. Under 2.5, we're overpaying by 27%. But like here, for the fight doesn't go, we're only overpaying by 1/10, or we're actually underpaying by 1/10 of 1%. For the under 2.5, we're actually overpaying by only 1.33%. So we've got a line that was priced favorably, despite the fact that we have a killer be killed fighter here. So at plus 105, this was an auto bet. There's no way you can't bet that, but now the line is moving. Now you're paying minus 124 here. So you might want to start looking at that finish only prop for du Plessis, or maybe the decision only prop for Tavares, because du Plessis has never won a decision in his career, and that's 18 fights. So his minute winning capabilities are in question a little bit, Brady. But you and I both have these fight doesn't go to decision bets. The question is, are we overpaying for it now at minus 124? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think I'd touch it at minus 124. I think I like the Dricus side myself. He's now minus 149, minus 150. I think at this point, I would just take a shot at Dricus inside the distance, which is currently around plus 135, plus 145. And then, like you said, I want to see what the decision only is for Brad Tavares. I bet they're all over it. Minus 190 for the decision only. And then the finish only for Dricus is minus 275. And that actually opened up at minus 200, which I thought was a really good line there. But yeah, I think at this point, I'd probably just take Dricus inside the distance. I mean, Brad could finish him. I don't want to completely rule out a Tavares finish here. I mean, even like a late finish as well. Dricus has been finished twice, and both of those were in the third round, once by sub, once by knockout. So I don't want to completely rule out a Brad finish, but I think the majority of the finish equity is on that Duplessis side.
Yeah, you know what? I think if you were on that Tavares side, for instance, the people know that Duplessis is a finisher, but since he has been finished in both of his losses, maybe a cheeky bet would be take that finish-only prop for Tavares, because you're getting such big plus money, because if it goes the full 3, you get your money back. If you actually think Tavares is the better fighter here, and there's an argument for that. I mean, look,
Absolutely.
Plessis has been fighting on the South African regional scene, KSW. This is not the best level of competition. And even at the UFC level, fighting guys like Trevin Giles and Perez doesn't really inspire confidence in terms of like, oh, this guy's, killing people and really good fighters. So this is a step up. A guy like Tavares, who's been in there with Adesanya, been in there with some of the best fighters in the division. So that would be an interesting way to look at it if you're on that Tavares side. But I think the line is getting just a little bit away, but I still don't hate it. At minus 124 for a middleweight fight with a killer be killed fighter with an 18-fight sample size to draw from, I think it's still a bettable here.
Yeah, I'd rather be on that fight doesn't go myself rather than that fight goes with a guy like Duplessis. I mean, if he goes to decision, it'll be his very first time in 19 fights. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. Let us move on to another one. We have a kind of a tricky one. I'm curious to see what the numbers say about this one. So we have Gabe Green going against Ian Garry. The over 2.5 rounds sitting at minus 140. The under 2.5 rounds sitting at plus 110. The fight goes to decision, minus 110. The fight doesn't go to decision, minus 120. It looks like it's about a pick 'em across the board here, Weezy. So what are the numbers saying about this one here?
So we can see a lot of green here on the left because we don't have much of a sample size for Green and Garry at the UFC level, but 18 of their 23 combined fights have finished inside the distance. That's 78.3%. And we can see here that Gabe Green has finished 10 of his 11 wins inside the distance. The only one he didn't finish was Phil Rowe, and that was due to bad fight IQ. He could have easily finished that fight if he didn't follow Gabe Green down into his guard after he had kicked the bottom half of his leg off. And then he's been finished in 2 of his 3 losses. The only guy not to finish him, funny enough, was Daniel Rodriguez, who's an absolute stud. So, you could say that Green's not the most durable guy, even though he's shown durability at the UFC level. This guy's been finished in 2 of 3 losses. So we've got, a pretty good killer be killed fighter here in Gabe Green. And he's going up against an undefeated guy in Ian Garry, who's won 6 of his 9 wins inside the distance. So, so when we total up those numbers, it's 78.3%. So we like that from the fight doesn't go side. But here at the UFC level, only 2 of their 5 fights have finished inside the distance. This is a lightweight fight. Lightweight fights are finishing inside the distance 48.62% of the time. We're paying 53.49% for the fight doesn't go to decision here. So based on the small sample size we have of UFC fights, it looks like we're overpaying there and we're underpaying for the fight goes to decision. What happened? I don't know what happened there, Brady. I went way off screen. But here we go. See 3 of their 5 combined fights that, have went to decision at the UFC level. It's a 9% break over the implied probability of the line, an 8.6% break over the divisional decision rate. But if we look at just, the overall competition, it's a lot of red here. So it's kind of asking us to make that jump and to say, does the UFC data mean more than the data that came before it? And the answer to that question is I don't really know. And then we're also going into a weight class here, Brady, where it's a coin flip. 48.62% of fights finish, 51.38% go to decision. It's a coin flip. The line is kind of a coin flip. And, the stylistic intricacies of the matchup would say I would probably rather be on the fight doesn't go side, but I don't see a reason to bet it. None of the data is telling me or screaming at me to go one direction or another here.
Yeah, I don't have a great read on whether this one's going to finish. We see that Garry, he's never been finished. Green has been finished twice, but I mean, he's a tough guy. I mean, how many strikes did he eat from Daniel Rodriguez? Like, it was like 160, 70. I don't know. I could see it finishing. I could see it going to decision. I think a pick'em is about right, and one I'm just going to kind of stay away from, but I think it's going to be a very fun fight. We'll move on to the next fight. I believe this is the last fight on the prelims, and probably the best fight on the entire prelim card. We have Brad Riddell. No, wait. Did I skip one?
Cerrone Miller, yeah.
All right, we'll talk about this one first, and then we'll get to that one. We have Jim Miller going against Donald Cerrone. My bad, guys. Best fight odds has it all messed up there, and if I can find it, there it is. All right, we have the over-under is set at 2.5 rounds, the over 2.5 plus 130, the under 2.5 rounds minus 150. The fight goes to decision plus 160. The fight doesn't go to decision. It's minus 200. Weezy, Donald Cerrone was supposed to fight Joe Lozon, and I was all over the violence in the first fight. I had a pretty big bet on it. I was all over the violence in the second fight. And then this is a fight where I kind of just want to stay away here. I think it's so I'm paying more than I paid for the Lozon fight doesn't go. I think the first time I got it at something crazy like minus 130, minus 140. The second time around I got it at minus 182, and now I have to pay the best price out there is minus 200 for that fight doesn't go. And the reason I like that Joe Lozon fight doesn't go a ton because Joe Lozon is kind of a first rounder bust guy. Jim Miller, kind of a first rounder bust guy as well, but Jim Miller has that durability in that cardio, at least better cardio than Lozon. And I don't know. I could see this one finishing, and I think if it finishes early, it's probably Miller. But I could also see a decision here. So this is one I'm kind of staying away from, especially looking at the price tag. I was more confident that Lozon fight doesn't go. So let's see what the numbers say about this one, Weezy, and see if anything sticks out.
Well, we've got a real fat sample size here. You never see a sample size like this in UFC stats. This is the biggest data set that we will ever be able to work with on probability if we were to pair up any two UFC fighters. We just happen to pair up the two UFC fighters who have the most fights in the UFC. It's Cerrone against Miller. 37 fights for Donald Cerrone, 39 fights for Jim Miller. So we've got 76 total fights to break down here. 44 of them have finished inside the distance. That's 58%. That's about 7.2% better than the divisional finish rate, which is 50.72%. But when we apply it to the implied probability of the line, we're overpaying by almost 9%. And if we compare the divisional finish rate to the implied probability of the fight doesn't go to decision line, we're overpaying by about 16%. So I understand all the narrative reasons why you would bet the under in this fight, why you would bet the fight doesn't go in this fight. It's getting a little bit out of hand. And it's getting a little bit out of hand when you compare it to a sample size this massive. 76 UFC fights to draw from, a 58% finish rate. We're overpaying by almost 8%, by almost 9% when we compare it to the implied probability of the line here. So, I mean, if you want to bet it, I totally get it. It's Miller Cerrone, a 39-year-old against a 38-year-old. There's reason to believe that Cerrone might not even show, he might give you 2.5 minutes and then just say, all right, I'm done. And you never know, Miller might too, so I get why you're doing it. Just know that you're overpaying. Just know that there's a huge sample size of data that says you should have probably gotten this around minus 150.
Yeah, and even then, I don't know if I'd be running to the window for it. I was gonna look at the Jim Miller first round props, but they're not giving us any crazy lines like they did for Lozon. I think Lozon, they had the first round knockout prop like plus 1,400, something crazy like that, With Jim Miller here, the first round knockout props only like plus 400, plus 500. Jim Miller first round in general is only plus 280. So just kind of an unbettable fight for me. Would really hope that Lozon fight happened. It didn't. So we'll get to see this one, but I just have a weird feeling about this one. So I'm going to stay away from it. I would lean towards it finishing, but I just don't want to lay minus 200 on it. Let us move on to the next fight. We have Brad Riddell going against Jalin Turner. And like I was saying, has to be the best fight on the prelims. Cannot wait for this one. We have the over-under is set at 2.5 for the most part. The over 2.5 rounds, plus 150. Under 2.5 rounds, minus 180. The fight goes to decision, plus 155. The fight doesn't go to decision, minus 190. I did pull the trigger on this earlier in the week. I have 1.5 units on the fight. Doesn't go at minus 150. That line has moved ever since. Very popular play and for a very good reason. So not only do I have a bet on the Dricus du Plessis, fight doesn't go. He's a killer be killed fighter. Jalin Turner is also definitely a killer be killed fighter with a 100% finish rate. So I do like the spot quite a bit, and I'm hoping the numbers kind of line up here.
Yeah, look, they do. I mean, let's just go over here to the left and see that Jalin Turner has finished all 12 of his wins inside the distance, and he's favored to win this fight. 3 of his 5 losses, he's been finished. So almost over 88% of Jalin Turner's fights have not seen the scorecards. So we love that. And, for Riddell, it's 58%. So he's finishing at a decent rate as well. When we go over here to the UFC stats, we see that only 1 of 5 of Riddell's fights have finished inside the distance, but 7 of 8 of Turner's have, right? And it's not like Riddell's fights haven't been fucking crazy. They haven't been wars, like absolute bloodbaths, fun fights. So this is one where I really do feel like in Turner, we've got a killer be killed fighter here. And that should push that line to where we are overpaying for it. And yeah, we are. I mean, and rightfully so. 65.52% minus 190 is a 14.8% overpayment when we compare it to the 50% finish rate of the division. So, but 8 of their 13 combined fights have finished inside the distance. That's 61.5%. So when we compare it to that, knowing that Turner has finished 7 of his 8 UFC fights inside the distance, which gives us a killer be killed fighter, we're only overpaying by 4% based on the implied probability of that minus 190 here. Excuse me. And then if we look at the divisional finish rate, which is 50.72%, these guys are finishing at 61.5. So that's 11% better. Their UFC fights are finishing at an 11% better rate than UFC 3-round fights at this division. So it doesn't really look like we're overpaying all that much. I mean, don't forget, we're overpaying by 14.8% here. But when we go back to like Hall Muniz, we see we're overpaying there by 24%, 27% for the under 2.5. So there's overpaying and then there's overpaying. And these numbers here, the almost 11% break that we get over the divisional finish rate, and the only 4% overpayment when you compare the implied probability of the line to how many of their fights have finished inside the distance, I could still get behind a minus 190 fight doesn't go to decision bet here.
Yeah, I could too. And I'd feel more comfortable laying minus 190 on this fight doesn't go than the Cerrone, honestly. Maybe a hot take there, but how this fight's going to play out, man. I mean, Jalin Turner just goes after it. He's very dangerous on the feet, on the mat. And then on the flip side, like, I don't want to completely rule out a Brad Riddell finish. Jalin Turner, a 44% striking defense, which is actually the same as Julio Stoliarenko, which is terrifying. And on top of that, Jalin Turner has been knocked out 3 times as well. So I think there's finish equity on both sides here. Both guys have been finished. Brad Riddell finished in both his losses. Turner finished in 3 out of 5. And then both guys are just going to throw down. So I like that fight doesn't go as well. And I would still bet that at minus 190. And BetOnline does have the best price out there. Minus 190. We see minus 250 on DraftKings, minus 205 on FanDuel. And I think that line keeps getting wider and wider. But it should be a very fun fight. And definitely cannot wait for that fight. So let us move on to the first fight of the main card. Before we do so, we have 72 of you in here. Y'all can please hit the like button, subscribe here to the MMA Engine so you not miss out on all the content we provide week after week. We have the main card opener, and it is going to be Sean O'Malley going against Pedro Munhoz. We have the over 2.5 sitting at minus 125. Under 2.5 rounds sitting at -105. The fight goes to decision is sitting at +105. The fight doesn't go to decision is sitting at -135. Weezy, I know you have a couple bets on this fight, so I know you're excited about this one.
Definitely. I mean, I'm excited about this one just as a fan, but as a betting fight, I love to hang my hat on somebody's legendary durability. In this case, we're talking about Pedro Munhoz, a guy who's got 7 UFC losses and who's never been finished, and he's fought the who's who of the division. Now, Sean O'Malley has finished 6 of his 8 wins inside the distance, and he's been finished in his only loss. So 7 of his 9 UFC fights have finished inside the distance. Definitely more of a killer-be-killed fighter here. While Munhoz is a good finisher, finishing 6 of his 9 UFC wins inside the distance. But like I said, never been finished in 7 losses. So we see that 13 of their 26 fights have finished inside the distance. That is 50%, which is just a little bit better than the divisional finish rate. And we see here for the fight doesn't go to decision, we're overpaying by about 7.4% based on the implied probability of the line, which is 57.45%. If we go down here to the UFC rates, for fight goes to decision, we see this big green area right here, and that's because 7 of their 8 losses have went to decision. And the only loss that didn't go to decision was the one where O'Malley got hurt. He got drop foot due to a calf kick. So I'm liking the fight goes to decision here. I think the only guy who really has finishing equity is going to be Pedro Munhoz in this fight, because Pedro can catch you in that guillotine. He can land those low leg kicks, which we've seen Sean O'Malley have bad injuries to his lower legs twice in only 9 UFC fights. That's not good. You know, that's almost a 25% implied probability of the fights that he's gotten injured in, right? So I'm liking the fight goes here actually quite a bit. Now, I think that this is going to be Sean O'Malley all day, so I have a 1-unit bet on O'Malley to win by decision. I also have a 1-unit bet at +120 on the fight goes to decision, because Pedro Munhoz just is not a guy that you ever finish, and I don't think O'Malley's going to finish him here. I think that it's going to go the full 15, but I think that Sean O'Malley will cruise with that massive height, reach, and volume advantage that he has. He's just a far better striker, and we've never really seen Munhoz wrestle effectively or go to the cage. He's happy to stand in the middle of the cage and bang, and I don't think he's going to be successful doing it against a striker as high quality as Sean O'Malley.
Yep, absolutely agree. I don't have a bet on this fight myself, but yeah, I think there's a lot of ways you can play it. I know Brandon was talking about being on that over 1.5 rounds, the over 2.5 about a pick of -110. The fight goes to decision, still plus money. Best line you can get is +106. I think Sean O'Malley by decision is another decent look, sitting at +170. And then, like you said, I think the Munhoz finish only could be another way to play it, which is +215 on Bet Online. I think I saw +225 on FanDuel. So yeah, lots of ways to play this fight. I haven't bet anything yet, and I probably should have earlier in the week because there is money coming in on this fight, because I could have got it at +125. So kind of passed there, so missed out on that. But yeah, I agree with everything, relying on that durability of Munhoz. And if there is a finish, it honestly probably is Munhoz going out there and finishing Sean O'Malley. So don't hate all those looks, and yeah, should be a very fun fight to kick off the card. Let us move on to the next fight. Another very, very tricky one for me. We have Robbie Lawler going against Bryan Barberena. The over-under set at 2.5 rounds. The over 2.5 -175. The under 2.5 +145. The fight goes to decision -165. The fight doesn't go to decision is +135. The reason I have a problem with this one, Weezy, is because I think they're just going to stand in the middle and bang for 3 rounds with no regards to any striking defense. I think a lot of volume is going to be landed on each other's faces, but both guys are just very, very durable. Both guys just don't really get knocked out all that often. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like this one can really go either way. And we are getting a nice plus number on this fight doesn't go. So I think if anything, I lean on the fight doesn't go. But one, I'm probably just going to sit back and watch. We have the fight doesn't go best price out there, +135. I see a +140 on Caesar. So curious to see what this one says, Weezy.
Yeah, I mean, it loves the fight doesn't go, actually. Check it out, right? We don't often see 3 greens, but we got them here. If we compare the 48.62% finish rate of the welterweight division to the implied probability of the fight not going to decision at plus 140, which is 41.67%, we get a 7% edge over the books on that data point. We get a 4.2% edge over the books when we compare the finish rates of these two fighters at the UFC level, which is 19 of 36 fights. That's 52.8%. When we compare that to the 48.62% divisional finish rate, we get a 4.2% edge over the books. And when we compare this 52.8% finish rate with the implied probability of the fight doesn't go to decision at 41.67%, we get an 11.1% edge over the books. So, look, almost half of their combined losses at the UFC level have been inside the distance. More than half of their combined UFC wins have come inside the distance, and they're both finishing at the exact same rate, 57.1%. So, we've got a big sample size of fights. We've got a fight that stylistically, if we look at it, Brady, it's probably going to be two dudes in the center of the cage just swinging. And we got one of them's 40. The other one's 33 coming off of 3 back surgeries. Yeah, man, fight doesn't go to decision at plus money is a good look purely by the analytics here. And if you look at the tape too, Brady, I kind of feel like if you look at the tape, you watch these guys' last couple fights, they're in there fighting. They're not in there taking breaks. They're not in there leaning on their opponent on the cage. They're trying to take dudes' heads off. So I love this one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate it. I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't want to be laying chalk on a fight goes to decision bet. I mean, these guys, like you said, they're just going to stand and bang. I guess my one concern is I think if there is a finish, I kind of lean it towards being Robbie Lawler getting the finish. We saw Barberena not able to finish Jason Witt. Not a great look there. We saw Barberena get dropped by Jason Witt. So I think if there is a finish, it's probably Lawler. But even then, like, Lawler is 40 years old, but he has been very tough. So yeah, I mean, I think the plus money there, plus 140 out there on that fight doesn't go. I think that was the ticket I would much rather be holding than laying minus 170 on a fight where they're just going to go out there and hit each other in the face probably 200 plus times, honestly. So yeah, I do not mind that, but I don't know if I'll get to the window on that one there. Let us move on to the next fight here. We have Sean Strickland going against Alex Pereira, another one that I'm really struggling with here. We have the over-under set at actually 1.5 rounds. The over 1.5 is minus 175. The under 1.5 is plus 145. That over 1.5 has been hit throughout the week. It did open up minus 165. The fight goes to decision, plus 155. The fight doesn't go to decision, is minus 190. Yeah, kind of a tricky one here, Weezy. I could see either fighter finishing, but a decision would not shock me as well. I'm curious to see what the numbers say about this one.
Yeah, so we don't have much. We've only got 2 fights for Pereira at the UFC level. When we look at UFC, Strickland, 5 of his 15 fights have finished inside the distance. 6 of 17 total, 35.3%. So based on the fight doesn't go, we're overpaying by 7.5% when we compare the 55.46% finish rate to the 63% implied probability of the line. We're overpaying by 20% when we compare the 6 of 17 fights that have finished inside the distance at 35.3% to the divisional finish rate of 55%. So that's 20% we're overpaying. And we're overpaying by 27.7% when we compare that 35.3% to the implied probability of the line finishing inside the distance, which is almost 63%. So based on Strickland's sample size of 15 UFC fights and only 5 of them finishing inside the distance, if you're betting that, you're overpaying, frankly. But I could see why people are overpaying. It's Alex Pereira. This guy hits people and they don't wake up for a while. And then, he's a bad grappler. So I could see Strickland, potentially getting a submission on the ground should it go there. The guy is a good submission grappler. So I don't know, man. For me, I think if we look down here at this UFC data, you look at all that green. I mean, you kind of like that. And the fact that Pereira couldn't finish Bruno Silva's been finishing 5 of 6 losses going into that fight. Now, he had never been knocked out, if I'm not mistaken. But still, The fact that he's not finishing Bruno Silva and actually, frankly, losing a lot of striking exchanges to him as well, I didn't like that. But I would be with the data being my guide here, Brady, I would have to be endorsing overs and fight goes rather than the fight doesn't go. And maybe if you're on that fight doesn't go, maybe just go Pereira inside the distance. Because, Strickland, not much of a finisher, but maybe if he does get a finish, it'll be a submission and you can get that at plus 1,100. But I would have to endorse the fight goes, the over 2.5 here. As we can see, getting a 5.3% break on the fight goes, a 3.6% break on the over 2.5, and a 20% break and a 25.5% break when we take the UFC numbers of both fighters and compare them to the divisional decision rates and to the fight goes to decision implied probability. So, yeah, man, this is actually pretty clear that we go the fight goes. But once again, you're betting against the power of Alex Pereira, and you're also, have to be aware that, Strickland might just be crazy enough to stand with this dude. And then if he does, that's going to be torture. Watching that, being like, please, no touching, don't hit each other, for 15 minutes of that with Alex Pereira in the cage, that would be a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I think if Strickland grapples, I think the sub's live. I think the Alex Pereira knockout is live. But yeah, if you like the fight goes plus 155, I think I would lean towards that way as well. I'm curious to see what the finish only is for Pereira. Finish only for Pereira is like minus 200, and then I'm curious to see what the decision only is for Sean Strickland. Because I think if this does go to decision, I think that means Sean Strickland probably got it done there. The decision only for Sean Strickland, they're all over at minus 200. See, I'm going to sit back and watch this one. It should be one of the better fights on the main card. Really no strong lead one way or another, but I'm not laying minus 190 on the fight doesn't go. I could easily see this one going to decision. All right, next we have the co-main event. We have Alexander Volkanovski going against Max Holloway, and we have the over-under is set at 4.5 rounds. The over 4.5 minus 260, under 4.5 rounds plus 200. The fight goes decision minus 200. The fight doesn't go decision plus 160. That minus 200 is the best price out there by a decent margin. We see 5 Diamonds minus 225, FanDuel minus 260, DraftKings minus 250. We saw the first 2 fights go the distance. And, no hot take for me. I know a lot of people are on like the Volkanovski KO side. I don't think you're knocking out Max Holloway. So I think this does go the distance as well. If anything, I'm probably betting that fight goes at minus 200. Weezy, what are the stats saying on this one here?
Yeah, well, it says that 16 of their 36 combined UFC fights have finished inside the distance. That's 44%. We compare that to the 35% implied probability of the line, and we're getting a nice break there, 8.7%. When we compare that 44% to the 35%, and we get a 1.3% break when we compare that 44.4% to the 43.18% implied probability of fights finishing inside the distance. However, we got to look at our 5-round stats, Brady, because we've got 44 fights that have finished or 44 featherweight fights that have were scheduled for 5 rounds. And we can see that 25 of them have finished inside the distance. So 25 divided by 44, it's a little over 50%. Do I have that number here?
56%.
56.8%, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And look at this. What's interesting is 2 of those finishes were in the last 5 seconds of the 5th round. Max Holloway against Bryan, Frankie Edgar against Cub Swanson, 4:56 round 5. And then Yair Rodriguez over Chan Sung Jung, 4:59 of round 5. So featherweight fights are barely finishing inside the distance 5 rounds 56% of the time. So you kind of got to like that if you're betting that fight goes, because you're paying 66%. But both of these guys are incredibly durable. And when we go back to the prop template here, we're going to see that only 2 of their 7 combined losses as pros have been inside the distance, and only 1 of 6 at the UFC level. And it was a submission. These guys are primarily knockout guys. and they don't really grapple much. So the odds of either one of these guys knocking each other out are fairly low. And I am liking the fight goes to decision here at -200. If we go down to the fight goes data, we're going to see that we're overpaying by about 11.1% based on 55.6% of these guys' 36 fights going to decision. But really against the divisional finish rate, it's only 1.3% that we're overpaying. And then we have to keep in mind, that featherweight fights are not finishing inside the distance very often at 5 rounds. So we're not leaving this, if we're talking a 56% finish rate, we're only comparing it to 43, dude. We saw last week a 72% finish rate at lightweight when they only finished 49% in 3-round fights. We saw a 23% bump here. Here we're seeing about a 13% bump. So these featherweight fights are very unlikely to finish inside the distance. And we've seen this fight twice already. Max Holloway is one of the most durable human beings on the planet. Alexander Volkanovski is one of the most durable human beings on the planet. So fight goes to decision. Fight starts round 4. Fight starts round 3. All look like good parlay pieces to me.
Yep, I think so as well. And I'm just taking a look at it here. So Max Holloway has absorbed 1,811 significant strikes, and he's never even been knocked down. I just struggle to see, if there is a finish in this fight, who does it come from? And you think it's Volkanovski being the first one to knock out Max? Maybe Volkanovski can catch or maybe Holloway can catch Volkanovski. I'm not so sure. I think that fight goes decision -200 is still pretty solid there. I mean, I wouldn't probably lay -260 on it, -250, but yeah, -200 on Bet Online. It's something I could take a look at. And I do have the over 2.5 parlayed as well. So I think this does go over. I think it does go to decision. If there is a finish, I would be fairly shocked. And I'm not sure who would get the finish if there was one, honestly. But next we have the main event. 91 of you in here with us, almost to that 100 mark, which would be awesome. But be sure to leave a like. Also subscribe. 93 of you in here with us. 7 away from that 100.
Let's go 100, baby. Come on.
100 would be awesome on the MMA Engine YouTube channel. But we have the main event. We have Israel Adesanya going against Jared Cannonier. The over-under, just like the co-main, is set at 4.5, but the over 4.5 is -115. The under 4.5 is -115. The fight goes decision, -110. The fight doesn't go to decision is -120. It's lined about a pick 'em here, Weezy, and I kind of feel the same way. I feel like it's up to how Jared Cannonier approaches this fight. I think if he wants to stick on the outside and strike with Adesanya for 25 minutes, Adesanya will be very content to just outstrike him for 25 minutes. And I think if Cannonier wants to rush in and try to finish Adesanya, I think Adesanya can absolutely clip him on the way in. So I guess it's just really how Cannonier approaches this fight for me. I don't know which way I lean. I guess I kind of lean it being a typical Adesanya decision where he's just outpointing Cannonier, but would a finish shock me? Not really. This one I don't have a strong read on, Weezy. I'm curious to see what the numbers say on this one.
Yeah, it's hard to say, because, for instance, we've got a lot of Cannonier fights that took place at heavyweight, that took place at light heavyweight, and then we've got his middleweight schedule. And then, you've got Israel Adesanya here, who only 4 of his 12 UFC fights have finished inside the distance. I mean, for Cannonier, it's 8 of 13. So we see that 12 of 25 fights have finished inside the distance, just under 50%. But we got to remind ourselves that, if there's one fighter that's most likely to dictate the pace of this fight, it's probably Adesanya. I mean, he's done an excellent job of that thus far. If somebody rushes in on him, he'll clock them on the way in and finish them. And if somebody's willing to kickbox with him at range, he's really good at winning minutes out there and able to take fights to decision and win decisions. But, that last fight against Whitaker was very close. And I even felt like the Cannonier-Whitaker fight was close until Whitaker landed that head kick. Now, I thought Whitaker was winning. I figured he'd probably win all 3 rounds, but it wasn't a blowout by any stretch of the imagination until Whitaker landed that 1-2 head kick combination that he's famous for, and that's just deadly. But this one, I'm thinking this one does go to decision. Fight goes -104. If we look down here to the fight goes, we're going to see what we're overpaying 1.5% based on the implied probability of the line versus the divisional decision rate. We're getting a 7.5% break. But in this division, 185 pounds. Sorry, that's the wrong tab. This is the right one. If we sort 185 here, we're going to see a total of 57 fights, and 34 have finished inside the distance, Brady. 34 of 57.
59%.
Yeah, so 60% is minus 150. You know, that's the benchmark. You know, if you're just comparing it to the previous data of 5-round fights that have finished inside the distance, you'd be paying minus 150, right? But here, we're only paying minus 150, minus 104 for fight doesn't go. So that's 51%. Little bit of a break here. I mean, if you think that Adesanya is going to knock out Cannonier, and certainly if Cannonier lands a few low leg kicks and then a big overhand right, I mean, Israel Adesanya is not immune to being knocked out. It's happened. There's a guy on this card that's done it twice, but it was just in a different sport. So, yeah, I think that I would go fight goes here, simply because that, you know, only 40% of fights are going to decision. And then here we're paying 53%. Nah, I'm staying away from this one, dude.
Yeah, there's no way I'm touching this one. I mean, I could see there's two scenarios playing out in my head. I could see like a boring Adesanya decision, 50-45. I could see an Adesanya clip him at some point. I think that's on the table. And like you said, if Cannonier does win, it's most certainly going to be inside the distance. So like even like the Adesanya knockout prop is only like plus 170. Cannonier by knockout plus 600. I think I'm just going to stay away from this one. But I do have Adesanya parlayed, so I'm just hoping he wins. I don't care if he does it by knockout, decision. As long as Adesanya wins, I'll be happy personally. But in terms of picking the over-under, I really honestly don't know. So I'm just going to sit back and watch this one from a time prop perspective. And but we'll see what happens there, Weezy. But yeah, we did it. We went through all 12 fights here. And now that is left, we have the probability parlay. So what spots are really sticking out to you after going through the props here?
Yeah, how about Barber fight goes to decision at minus 250? I mean, it's wide enough to parlay it. We know that 1 out of their 11 combined losses has been inside the distance. So both of these ladies are incredibly durable. I think fight goes for Barber is a great parlay piece. What about you?
Absolutely. That's probably my favorite parlay piece on the entire card.
And then what about like a fight starts round 4 for Volkanovski Holloway? I mean, 2 incredibly durable dudes, a fight we've already seen twice. Nobody was really in any trouble anywhere. And, you know, you got a guy in Holloway who's absorbed over 1,800 significant strikes and has never been knocked down and never been knocked out, against a guy like Holloway, who, I mean, we've never seen him knocked down at the UFC level either. And he's just unbelievable. And he's got gills. I mean, you could put that dude in a guillotine and he could still breathe. You could put that dude in a triangle choke and he could still somehow manage to breathe. So why don't we do on FanDuel a fight starts round 4?
Got it. Minus 370.
Okay, yeah, that's a good parlay piece as well. And then what do we want to finish with here? Munhoz O'Malley, maybe fight starts round 3?
Munhoz O'Malley fight starts round 3 is minus 146. Okay,
ooh,
yeah. And that comes out
or even like the over 1.5, like Brandon said, man. And Brandon's saying Turner fight doesn't go to decision, man. That's a good look too, dude.
The one too. Those 3 though, the fight goes in the Barber fight, the fight starts round 4 in the Volkanovski fight, and the fight starts round 3 in the O'Malley fight. That comes out to plus 200.
I love that, dude. And then, you know, and I think that Brandon's right. We should throw the Turner fight should be a bet, but I don't think we need to necessarily parlay that one because it's less than minus 200. It's bettable where it's at. And you've got a guy in Jalin Turner who's got 100% finish rate, and he's fighting a guy in Riddell who's been finishing his only UFC loss. And the style of that fight is probably going to be on the feet and just be an absolute slobber knocker. So I think that's a good bet. I also think Lawler Barberena finishing inside the distance, dude, at plus 140.
That could be, yeah.
I mean, that's only 42% implied probability. It's even less than that. So I think that's a good bet. Munhoz O'Malley goes to decision is a good bet. Riddell Turner doesn't go to decision is a good bet. Barber goes the decision is a good bet, but let's keep that parlay at plus 200. 3 legs, all minus money. Let's do that one.
I like it. I like it. There we go. All right, Weezy, we did it. And we did hit the 100 mark in here. I think that's the very first show with the 100 people in there. So thank you guys so much for supporting the MMA Engine. And thank you, Daz, for the dono saying thanks, guys, in chat. The ones that hit the like. Yeah, we have, I think, like 49 likes in here. So almost 50. You guys are killing it. And always do appreciate you, Daz, one of the biggest supporters in the MMA community. Weezy, I will kick it to you. I think this concludes your content for the rest of the week. I know you're going to be live at the Pub Sports guys on Saturday and on my channel on Saturday as well, but let the people know where they can find you and what you have going on.
Yeah, right here on the MMA Engine YouTube channel is my home. You can find me here every Thursday. You can find me here most Mondays for a Balls Deep breakdown. I couldn't do one this week because I was on the Die Hard MMA podcast with my guy Clint, and I couldn't do an Ask Weezy last night on my channel because I was with the Chronic Combat Conversations guys. So, yeah, you can find me on the MMA Engine. You can find me on Pub Sports Radio, and you can find me on my YouTube channel, Uncle Weezy, every Tuesday night for Just the Tip. Got Sean Strickland down as Uncle Weezy's ass shaving of the week. Oh. I realize it can blow up in my face, but you know what, Brady? Fortune favors the bold, and I am bringing my sack of oranges to the event on Sunday, virtually, so to speak, and I think that Sean Strickland's going to take care of business. Can't wait for this fight. Can't wait for the entire event. And we got to stack cash tickets like flapjacks for UFC 276. It's such a good card. Why not make it even better by winning some money?
Let's do it. That is always the goal. You guys can follow me on Twitter, DFS_numbers, Instagram, DFS by the numbers. I'll be back here tomorrow night on the MMA Engine YouTube channel at 7 o'clock for my final thoughts video. And then back Saturday on DFS by the numbers YouTube channel for Best Bet with me, Uncle Weezy, Narco Cop, and Eric Betts Fights. Leave a like on your way out. Subscribe if you have not already. And best of luck for UFC 276. Let us make some money, guys.